Welcome, Heroes to Hive students. My name is Dr. Adam Ingreo, and today we're going to be talking about, well, you're curious about beekeeping. So you've decided that this is something that you might want to do. And before you jump into anything, I always think it's a really good idea just to kind of consider what you're getting yourself into, what your desires are out of the activity that you want to do, and what the desires of your livestock are. So today, what this lecture is really to kind of give you an idea about what's all involved in beekeeping, kind of what you can expect. And the way that I'm going to present this today is through the most common questions that I get from new beekeepers about beekeeping specifically. So we're going to go through a series of questions. I'm going to give you an idea about what exactly goes on with each one of these questions as far as what are their considerations and what you should be thinking about. And hopefully this gives you an idea of what it's going to take to be a good beekeeper. Now, I want to start this first and foremost by saying that we do not need more beekeepers in the United States. We have plenty of beekeepers. What we need is more educated beekeepers because we are seeing historic losses and have been seeing historic losses now for several decades in the honeybee industry, mainly due to pests and pathogens. And so the era that we are in beekeeping, you need to be educated. You need to be able to make educated decisions about your livestock, how to manage them, and that's how you get them to survive. The idea that you're going to get into beekeeping and you're just going to, bees are going to die every single year and you're going to replace them, that is not sustainable. And that is not what I am interested in teaching you. I am interested in teaching you to be a sustainable beekeeper that is able to recover from your own losses every single year by being able to make splits from your survivor colonies. So I just want to put that in place right here at the forefront of this course, is that this is not a course on fun beekeeping. Anybody can just pick up beekeeping and have fun with it. That's totally fine. I am interested in teaching you to be a successful beekeeper, and that's what the Heroes to Hives course is all about. So considering what is involved with beekeeping, first and foremost, is the most important thing. And I'll tell you real honestly, when I've given this lecture in the past to students that I've worked with or to organizations that I've given, I always preface this by saying that if this lecture gives you the notion that beekeeping is not for me, then it was successful. If you get through this thing and you're saying, yep, I still want to do this, that is successful as well. Again, we don't need more beekeepers. If you're not ready for this, if this is too much of an investment of time and effort, that's fine. But we do not want to get into something where the bees are the ones who take the hit for our inability to manage them. So we need to be really upfront about that, okay? So let's start with, what are some of your considerations and what are some of the questions that you're probably thinking about when it comes to beekeeping? Well, let's start here. The first one that I always like to preface with people is, what do you want from your bees? What are you thinking right now? What is your expectation for getting into beekeeping? Why are you doing this? Why have you all of a sudden decided to get into bees? Well, there's lots of reasons why people get into honeybees. And it varies from person to person. So this is something that you need to consider yourself. Why am I doing this? Well, number one, I mean, the low-hanging fruit here is that most of us who get into beekeeping, we want honey out of the deal, right? We're looking to produce our own honey, whether that's taking control of your own, food chain or something like that, or, being independent from the food system by creating your own food products like honey. That's fantastic. And that's a great reason to get into beekeeping. But you also need to understand that honey's just not a given. From year to year, honey flows will be good, they'll be bad. Some years you'll get tons of honey, some years you won't get any at all. Some years you'll end up spending more money on feeding because of poor weather than you do off of actually reaping money from honey. So it can vary widely across, what the conditions are in the environment. And you need to understand that as a beekeeper, all environmental conditions are going to affect you. Every single storm that comes through is going to affect you. For example, last year my wife and I keep anywhere between, I'd say, 50 or 100 colonies a year, depending on how physically able I am at that time. And I'm a disabled vet. I've got several injuries. I've got a fused vertebrae in my neck. I've got back injuries. I've got ankle and knee injuries from the Army. And so I'm pretty beat up. And so some years, my disabilities keep me from keeping 100 hives. Other years, I'm down to 50 because I just can't do it physically. And so those things are considerations you need to keep in mind. But depending on where you're at physically, that can also impact honey production as well, because maybe you just don't have as many bees that year because physically you're just not able to do it. So there's a lot of things that go into beekeeping as far as how much honey you're going to produce. The other thing I want to impress upon you is that it also depends on where you live. So I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, one of the coldest climates in the United States. We regularly get over 10 feet of snow a year. And so for us, the season is very short. Typically about 6 months is all that we have for bees to be flying. And if during that 6 months, say for example, last year, the entire month of June, it rained. That means that bees aren't flying and aren't collecting nectar, which also means that we're not getting honey for an entire month out of a very short season. So that also can impact honey production. So these are things you need to keep in mind. Something else you may be thinking about is pollination. And absolutely, pollination is an absolute thing that you probably want out of your bees. Whether it's pollinating your own garden or doing pollination contracts as a form of income, these are, great uses for bees. And I mean, honeybees, European honeybees, which are not native to North America, keep in mind, that is what we primarily use them for, is pollination. It's like pollination on demand. So, we have native pollinators in the United States, hundreds of species in the United States. In Michigan, I think we have 467 species of native pollinators. We have lots of native pollinators that do a good job of pollinating native plants because their life history and evolutionary history is aligned with bloom times of the plants that they have co-evolved with. However, many of the agricultural crops that we have in the United States are not native to the US. And so the bloom times do not align with native pollinators, which is why honeybees are so important to our industries. For example, pollination, the biggest pollination in the world, event in the world is almonds from the Central Valley of California, I'm from San Luis Obispo. But right there in that area, in the central region of California, is where the biggest pollination event in the world takes place every year, and that is almond pollination. And 80% of the almonds in the world come from that one pollination event, and it is a very profitable thing for beekeepers, and it is absolutely necessary for those crops in order to pollinate them, because if we didn't have honeybees, we wouldn't get pollination or fruit set on those almond trees. And that's true for a lot of crops that are in the United States, that honeybees are basically pollination on demand. And so that's a really great thing to be thinking about. Maybe I want to do pollination. At the small scale, though, we run a 40-acre diversified farm in the UP, and basically what we see with all of the bees that we keep on our property is good fruit yields, good vegetable set. All of our plants are getting plenty of pollination because we have so many bees on site. Maybe that's something you want to do for your own garden or your own farm. Wax, propolis, pollen, these products of bees. These are also something that maybe you're after. Maybe you want to make wax candles, or maybe you want to make skincare products out of wax. Maybe you want to do something with propolis, like tinctures or things like that. Maybe you want to produce pollen. Maybe you want to consume pollen, which is a great health care thing for keeping yourself healthy. Guys, and I've heard this from my colleagues in Slovenia, pollen is great for prostate. So eating pollen on a regular basis is great for your prostate. So maybe it's something that's health related. Maybe you want to, use pollen for keeping yourself vital and healthy. Or maybe you're looking to use wax for like candles, or maybe making furniture polish or something like that. Those are things to keep in mind. Value added products. Maybe, like I said earlier, maybe you want to get into things like skincare products using wax or things like that, or propolis. That is a value-added product. You're taking a raw material from bees and then turning it into something else. And so value-added products add value to that product. So you could take, some wax that may be worth $12 a pound and turn it into something that's worth $100 a pound at that point. So you're increasing the value of your product. And then lastly, and I don't want to say lastly, this is a very important part of beekeeping, especially for me personally in the work that we do at Heroes to Hives and in my own personal beekeeping endeavor, is the therapeutics of beekeeping. There is a lecture that you'll find in this course that is on therapeutics of beekeeping, that we have been developing these therapeutic practices with the Department of Veterans Affairs for the last 7 or 8 years. We've done a lot of research on this. We've published peer-reviewed papers on this, and we can demonstrate that using the therapeutic practices that we've developed, that we are seeing in the study that we did up to a 30% reduction in things like depression and anxiety within veterans. by using bees as a modality for therapy. And so if you're interested in that, check out our Be Calm, Be Well playlist or the Be Calm, Be Well course that's also here on the Heroes to Hives channel so that you can check those practices out here as well. If you're a veteran that's been dealing with things like loneliness, anxiety, depression, just having a tough time reassimilating to the civilian world, getting in touch with your bees and really starting to work with them in a therapeutic way can be one of the most beneficial things that you can do. I have been teaching beekeeping to veterans for over a decade. And what I can tell you from training over 20,000, well, right around 20,000 students at this point, and there's just more every year, is I get every year dozens of emails from individuals who say that bees literally have been the thing that have been keeping them going, have been helping them deal with their PTS, have been helping them deal with their depression and anxiety, have been helping them deal with their isolation. And the practices that we've developed are specifically for that. So check that out if that's something you're interested in. But the therapeutics of bees are very important. And you can see here in this picture, in these pictures, this is me that you see sitting at an altar. And what I'm doing is I'm getting prepared to move into an apiary by doing some breathing practices and making offerings to the bees. Some honey, some propolis, a little bit of care and a little bit of intention goes a long ways when you're working with an organism like honeybees. And you can develop a really, really close connection with your bees. Historically, bees only in the last couple hundred years have not really been considered a being that we have a spiritual connection with. But previous to the last couple hundred years, bees have always been part of spirituality within the human experience, especially when we get back into ancient Egypt, where beekeeping began, where bees were literally a gift from the god Ra. And so the spirituality, the connection that we can receive with bees is there. We just have to recapture that, and doing therapeutics with the bees, that's one way to do that. All right. So, what do your bees want from you? And this is, I think, the bigger question than what you want from your bees is what the bees want from you. So, let's talk about what the bees want from you. Well, there's some basics. So, bees are not native to North America. They are and have been managed like livestock for about 4,500 years. And so, bees are an integral part of agriculture and have been for thousands of years. But with that, and especially because we are bringing bees to an area, North America, that they are not native to, we have some things that we need to keep in mind that the bees expect from us. So, number one is food. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Dr. Adam, the bees go and collect their food. That's how they make honey. That's how they produce pollen. That's how they bring in pollen. And yes, that's true. But depending on where you're at, what the climate's like, how your season goes, there are many times during the year where food is not available in the landscape. And this is true for everywhere in the United States and globally for that matter. There are going to be periods of time, even if you live in a place like I'm from, like California. So if you live on the central coast of California, you pretty much live in the Goldilocks zone. Pretty much that coast of California down to San Diego is really a prime growing area. It's called the California Floristic Province. And it's basically an area of California where there is just a massive amount of floral diversity. And it's very unique to that area. Now, what you think about when you're thinking about food, if you're from that area, is pretty much. I mean, when I lived I lived in Morro Bay. When I lived in Morro Bay, I mean, I had tomato plants that lived for 2 or 3 years because the weather was always around 65, 70 degrees. So nothing ever really dies. There's always something flowering. But even in situations like that, there would be slight periods during the season where there'd be maybe 2 or 3 weeks here or 2 or 3 weeks there where there was a dearth between floral patterns. Or maybe we had a really dry year that year and the hills just never greened up and never produced any flowers. And so there was just limited floral resources available. So that's limited food. Taking it a step further, if you live somewhere like I live now, which is the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, we have literally 6 months where there's no food coming in. The bees are literally holed up in their hive, feeding on honey, thermoregulating. During that period of time, thermoregulation, the way that they do that is they consume honey to thermoregulate. So they eat honey as a caloric intake, then they shiver, which produces heat, and that's how they keep the cluster of bees warm during really cold winters. And bees do very well in winter. Winter is not something that bees cannot survive. But they cannot survive it if they run out of food. And so if, for example, like myself, usually around January or February, I'm starting to think about my bees a little bit, and it all depends on weather. The colder it gets, the more honey is consumed. So if we have a period of time where we're in minus 10, minus degrees Fahrenheit for several weeks, they are blowing through honey reserves. And so, although we in our apiary leave 150 pounds of honey on every single colony, which is equivalent to about 3 mediums worth of honey, we leave all of those hives with all that honey on. Even with all of those resources, if we're in a really cold spell for a long period, they will blow through that. And so we have to supplementally feed them dry sugar to get them through the rest of the winter. This is akin to like if you think about other areas of farming, like cattle farming, for example. You don't put your cattle up in the barn in the middle of the winter when it's freezing cold outside and you're trying to keep them from freezing and then just lock them up and don't feed them or give them water or anything like that. It's the same thing with bees. You need to make sure that your livestock is fed. And so that's something that's really important. Now, also during different times of the season, food comes into play too. In the spring, for those of us that live in northern climates or places even that just have mild winters where bees are not flying for a long period of time, when they're not flying and there's not anything flowering, they're not bringing in any food. And so even if you live in more temperate climates, there may be periods of time where there's just no food coming in. And so you may need to supplement that. You also may need to feed at the beginning of the season during things like spring buildup. During spring buildup, which is for those of us that live in winter climates, when you come out of winter and you start coming into spring, spring comes on and the temperatures start to change, day length starts to get longer. The bees start to put on brood. And that's something you may not know right now, but bees do have a period of time in winter climates where they do not raise other bees. They're just focused on thermoregulation. And so if you have brood coming on at the beginning of the spring, but the temperatures are still cold enough to where bees are not flying, they're producing brood, they need food. And so you may also have to supplement with things like pollen. You may have to supplement pollen to make sure that they have enough protein to feed young bees so that that colony builds up big and strong at the beginning of the spring, and instead of just letting it struggle, and then the spring breaks off and you have this little dinky colony that you're playing with for the rest of the year because you didn't properly build those bees up for the spring. So food is very important. Water is also really important. I mean, we are, here on Earth, we are water-based organisms, and so, you want to make sure that your bees are getting water. Access to clean, fresh water is an important thing for bees during the flying season. And so if you don't have access to a water source, say like a river or something like that, you need to make sure your bees have water. Now, here's an example. If you live in an urban area, and I've had this before because before we had our farm in the Upper Peninsula, we had a 2-acre urban farm in Lansing in Lower Michigan. And what I can tell you is that if you don't give them water around your bees, they will find it. And oftentimes, if you have a neighbor that has a swimming pool or a really beautiful pond, that's where they're going to go. So make sure you're giving your bees water so that you don't end up getting neighbors that come over and say, hey, all of your bees are in my backyard right now. You need to get rid of them, because that's a very difficult thing to correct. The bees are going to go where they want to go. So make sure your bees have water source. Forage is also really important, and this is something that your bees need from you. They need to make sure that they have access to high quality forage so that they can get high quality pollen and they can get high quality nectar to produce bee bread out of pollen and honey out of that nectar. So forage resources are really important. This is something that you can augment. So you can put in pollinator habitat to help support that, or you can place your bees in an area that has access to a lot of flowering resources. But forage is really important. If you're going to put your bees somewhere where there's not a lot of flowering forage, that's going to be a tough place for your bees to be, and they're not going to do very well. So you need to make sure you have access to good forage. Medication. Sometimes bees get sick and you need to medicate them. There are bacterial diseases that we deal with. There are fungal diseases that we deal with. There are all sorts of pests and pathogens that we deal with. And so sometimes medication is necessary. It's not necessary all the time, but if you need it, the bees need it, you need to help them out with that. Pest and pathogen management. Absolutely. This pest management specifically, and pathogen management, but pests more particularly, are going to be one of the major things that you are faced with in beekeeping. What makes or breaks a good beekeeper is their ability to manage pests and pathogens. We live in an era of beekeeping that has been unlike any era in the history of beekeeping, where we have a parasitic mite, the Varroa mite, that is literally a global epidemic. And we have another mite on deck to maybe come into the United States from Southeast Asia called Tropicalaps, which is 10 times worse than Varroa. So pest and pathogen management is going to be the focus of mainly what you do as a beekeeper. And that is something you need to take really seriously because your bees depend upon you to do that. Now, there are breeding programs for Varroa sensitive hygiene and things like that, and we'll cover that all in another lecture. But regardless of how hygienic your bees are, you are still going to have to monitor, you're still going to have to understand what you're looking at. You need to be educated in this piece. This is the make or break point for most beekeepers. From my experience of beekeeping for the last 20 years, when students of mine start taking pest management seriously, that is when their bees start to survive. If you just think that this is going to be something that, oh, well, we'll deal with Varroa at the end of the year or something like that, your bees are going to die every single year. This is a key success point for beekeepers is pest and pathogen management. You also need to make educated decisions. And this comes down to you educating yourself and being able to take that education up here in your brain and utilize it, critically think in the bee yard. So you need to be able to understand things like life cycles. You need to know that it's 16 days for a queen's life cycle. You need to know that the worker has a 21-day life cycle or the drones have a 24-day life cycle, because when you are in the hives and you are looking at this stuff and you're trying to determine what's going on, those things are going to matter for you to make educated decisions and not just be guessing at what you're doing, which these bees are really valuable. They should be highly respected by you as an individual, and you want to come to them with the most education and most educated decision-making process that you can come with. This is all about supporting bees. This is not about just going for it. And that's not my philosophy with beekeeping. That's why if you are new to beekeeping, I always suggest, and this is for all of you, if you are new to beekeeping this year, do not buy bees this year. Take education courses, join a local bee club, get experience, and then jump into bees. And I can tell you, again, decades of teaching people that all the time, every single year, I will get several students that will contact me and say, Dr. Adam, I am really glad I didn't keep bees this year, because the amount of education that you're going to have to take in is tremendous. And so do your book work, get ready to go, get understanding the organism, because most of you have never worked with an insect like this. And they're very different than like a cat or a dog or any other form of livestock. So make sure you get your education. And you being here today, that's a great point. This is the start to that process. The other thing that your bees are going to expect from you is time. They need your time. You may be a busy individual and you may have lots of stuff going on. Maybe you have 4 kids. They're all doing sports and all of this kind of stuff. You have a partner that's, super busy as well, and you're looking at bees as like a way to decompress. Well, that's fine, but the time that you put into your bees is their time. It's not your time. So let me preface that. When you are working with bees and something needs to happen because of them, maybe you're getting to a point in the early part of the season where things are getting so congested and you are getting, the bees are getting ready to swarm because you haven't had the time to go out and work them. You need to make time for these bees, and the bees aren't going to wait for you. They're not going to say, oh, that's fine. We'll wait another week to swarm so that you can finish your project and come work with us. That's not the case. They're going to do this no matter what. You need to be working on the bees' time, not your time. Now, you can align that with your schedule, and maybe you work the bees on the weekends or something like that. But there invariably are going to be moments where you have to drop everything for your bees. That's just the reality of beekeeping. Now, if you have a couple hives, it may not be a big deal. If you're running 100 hives, that's a big deal. Or, more than that, that's a big deal. That your time has to be available for them because they're not going to wait for you. All right. So that's what your bees are expecting from you. And it's a lot. The bees are expecting a lot from you. You need to live up to those expectations. And the way that you do that is educating yourself, preparing yourself. that, hey, this is what I'm getting myself into. And like I said at the beginning, if it turns out that this just isn't for you, if this seems like way too much commitment, then great. You made a great decision. You got interested in bees. You can still support bees. Plant lots of flowers. Join a local bee club and still go to the bee meetings and maybe, work with somebody else's bees for a while before you're ready to make that jump. But just don't jump into it just because you want to do it. The bees are too important for that. We are not at a point in time where we can just play around with bees anymore. Bees are critical, and we are seeing losses that are unsustainable in the United States and have been for, like I said, decades. This is not the time to just play with bees. This is the time to be serious and support this organism the way it needs to be supported, to support not only our national food security, our food system, but also the vitality and the longevity of these bees, because they are the best pollinator we have. If we lose honeybees, the agricultural community in the United States will be hurt so bad, especially the specialty crop industry that really relies on honeybees for pollination, will be hurt, will be devastated if we lose honeybees altogether. And right now, we are at some of the lowest honeybee populations in the United States since post-World War II. So we don't have a lot of bees. Post-World War II, we were hovering, I might get my figures a little messed up here, about 5.7 million colonies. Right now, we're hovering around 2.5 million. That's a huge, huge reduction in bee population and honey producing colonies in the United States. And our population has only gotten bigger. So the problem is not getting better. It is getting worse year by year. We don't need people just playing around with bees. Like I said, we do not need more beekeepers. We need more educated beekeepers whose bees survive year to year and they can contribute to the population of bees in our country. Excuse me. Next question. How hard is beekeeping? I laugh because I get this question a lot. How hard is it to keep bees? I mean, it's just a bunch of insects. You put them in a box, they do everything on their own. That's not the case. Bees are one of the hardest things to do in agriculture. There are very few agricultural endeavors that are harder than honeybees. Go raise cattle, go raise sheep, go raise pigs, grow some crops. If you're looking for an easy thing to get on a farm and do, bees are not the thing to start with. Start with something easier. And like I've been alluding to moving into this lecture, we are seeing record losses. So in 2024 to 2025, we had the highest recorded losses in the United States in history of honeybees. It was somewhere around 55 to 65% of all honey producing colonies in the United States in 1 year. This is not the time to play with bees. This is the time to be serious about this. If you are getting into beekeeping to help national food security, to help our food system, you need to really take this to heart because this is a really important point. You are going to lose bees every single year. And it's not a matter of are you going to lose bees? It's a matter of how bad that loss is. And when I say that we want to teach you to be sustainable beekeepers, what that goal is no more than 15% annual loss. That is considered a sustainable apiary, where you can lose 15% and then recover from all those losses and then create more bees as well. But if you're losing 50 or 60% of your bees or 100%, which is very common within the hobbyist industry, this figure, the 55 to 65%, is the commercial industry. Those are the guys that know what they're doing. The hobbyist industry was hit much harder with this figure. And regularly, I hear stories of people losing 100% of bees every single year and then just replacing them with new bees. That is not sustainable. That is going to collapse our industry if that trend continues. So make sure you understand that your input, your education, your understanding, your sustainability of your operation, that's the key here. 15% loss is what we're shooting for. Historically, for the last 20 years, we typically have somewhere between, usually around 5% loss. So usually out of 100 colonies, I may lose 4 or 5 of them. That's sustainable. That's what we're shooting for. That all can be achieved with good education and good critical thinking. So constant education is absolutely necessary to be successful. Bees are changing all the time. So like I had mentioned earlier, varroa mite has been the big thing that we've been dealing with in the United States and globally, in the US since 1987. And it has been devastating to our industry. But if beekeepers didn't keep educating themselves, if you just took this course and were like, okay, I know bees, Dr. Adam told me I'm good to go. That's not what I told you. But if you think that you can just take one course and be a successful beekeeper, that's not the case. You need to be involved with your beekeeping community. You need to be going to beekeeping conferences. You need to be going to listening to webinars from beekeeping experts from universities who are doing research on the most recent or upcoming threats headed towards honeybees. You need to be educated all the time. This isn't a one and done thing. This is a lifelong commitment to honeybees that you're endeavoring into. And I can tell you from having committed the last 20 years of keeping bees and 25 years of working in entomology, it's very rewarding. It's not something that's a lot of heavy lifting if you're really interested into it. But you got to keep going. You got to keep educating yourself. You got to keep reading books. You got to keep keeping up on the most recent stuff that's coming out and is threatening our industry. We're riding on a knife's edge right now and have been for a very long time in the United States and globally with honeybees. Education is how we stay on that knife edge and don't fall off and lose everything. All right, how much time will it take? That's a great question, because as you're thinking about to yourself, this is something I want to get into. Dr. Adams already given me the gloom and doom. I probably don't want to even keep bees at this point. And I don't want to do that. You'll notice throughout this course, I'm very passionate about honeybees, particularly about their survival. And I don't want this passion to come off as criticizing or anything like that. It is pure passion for what I do and this organism that I work with. So I want you to understand that I want you to be a successful beekeeper. That's the whole reason I developed this course, is I want you to be a successful beekeeper, but I also want you to understand all the risks. As veterans, you understand this. Like we always do intel before we go into a mission, right? We want to know what we're getting into. We want to be able to plan and execute expertly because of the planning and the intel that we have gathered to be able to put ourselves in an advantageous situation when we go into something. That's what we're trying to do here. So I'm not trying to discourage you. I just want you to understand the logistics and what you're facing going into beekeeping. So how much time will this take? Well, you can generally, the easiest figure to put, and this will change over time. You will get more and more, familiar with honeybees, but in the beginning, when you're brand new, 1 to 2 hours per month per hive is about what you're going to spend. And usually like an inspection, a comprehensive inspection that you're doing about every 3 weeks or so. In the beginning, it's going to probably take you 45 minutes or an hour to get through colony because everything's new and you're looking at things, you're not really sure. It's hard to find the queen. It's hard to tell if I'm queen right, and we'll teach you how to do all of that in this course. But you can plan on about 1 to 2 hours a month. Now, as you get more experienced, normally in an average inspection, I'm spending no more than 10 minutes in a colony. That's at the extreme end. Normally, I can get through a colony in under 10 minutes of doing a comprehensive inspection because I've been doing it a long time and I know what I'm looking at. And you will get there eventually. But in the beginning, plan on about 1 to 2 hours per month per hive. And this is not on your schedule, like I said before. This is on the bee schedule. So you need to prioritize your bees like you would any other animal in your care, okay? Just like you would your dog or your cat or whatever pets you have or livestock you have, you need to prioritize them and make sure that you have the time in your busy schedule to carve out that 1 to 2 hours a month per hive. It may not sound like a lot, but if you have 10 hives, that's 20 hours a month potentially. That's a lot, right? So make sure you're keeping that in mind as you're scaling. What will it cost to get started? Another great question, because beekeeping is actually not that cheap. It's a pretty expensive hobby. And if your bees die every single year, it gets really expensive really fast. So it all depends on a few different things. So depending on the hive style that you go with, it could be anywhere from $500 for a full complete hive. So that would be like a Langstroth hive. That's the basically the standard in the United States is the Langstroth hive. It was developed in the U.S. in 1852. It was patented by Lorenzo Langstroth, and it has literally taken over the entire industry since the 1850s. And it is the standard hive. It's what all commercial beekeepers are using. It's what most hobbyists and sideliners are using. And for a full setup of a hive, equipment wise, you're looking at about $500 in equipment per hive for the hive bodies, the frames, the telescoping cover, the bottom board, all of that stuff. Now, depending on the hive style you go with, that may change dramatically. So for example, the pictures that you see here, these are from my travels in Slovenia. Slovenia is the country that has the most beekeepers per capita in the world. 1 in every 200 individuals is a beekeeper. Bees are it's hard to even put into context, but bees are a very important part of Slovenian culture. They pride themselves on their bees, and it is the home, the natural range of the Carnolian bee. And so what you see here on the left are Slovenian Aja hives, or AZ hives is what they're called in the United States. So you see the top left picture here, that is what is called a chedelnjak, and that is a hive house in Slovenia. So in Slovenia, they keep bees in these houses. And this is the style of beekeeping that they do. And it's the style that's used throughout the country, whether it's commercial scale or hobbyist scale. You work these bees from inside of the building, and so you see this is the picture on the right of that top picture is the inside view. You take off a door, and this is what you see. And then the bottom picture is actually when you take those doors off, what you're looking at are the frames right there. So that is a different type of beehive. It is a very good hive if you have lifting injuries. So we have 15 of these at our farm in a hive house, in addition to all of our Langstroth hives. And this is, when it's my day to work the Aja hives, my body is just thanking me. Now you could start, if you're starting in beekeeping, you can decide what kind of hive you want to go with and what style you want to go with, depending on what your disabilities are, things like that. Historically, in the Heroes to Hives program, about 60% of us have a service-connected disability. So that's why I bring this up as alternative hive styles, and we'll talk about alternative hive styles in other parts of the course. But those hives are going to cost you about $1,000 a piece, so they're much more expensive. The thing that with the Aja hives to keep in mind, though, is you only buy them once, whereas with Langstroth, your hive bodies, they're typically going to last you about 10 years if they're cared for. Your frames are going to go through about every 3 to 5 years. That's true for Aja hives too, because we cycle frames out as a way to prevent pathogen transmission and that type of thing, and buildup of pathogens and pesticides within the colony. Because when honeybees are bringing in or coming in and creating wax, the pesticides from the external world environment around them are oftentimes bioaccumulated in the wax. And so we actually cycle wax out about every 3 to 5 years. We cycle frames out as a strategy, as a biosecurity strategy to make sure that you're not getting exposure to harmful pesticides and things like that in your colony. So you will replace frames no matter what the hive style is. But that's something to keep in mind. But the hive bodies themselves, the Aja hive itself, you will never replace that. That will be something that you work with forever. When I was in Slovenia in 2024, I was working with a beekeeper who had hives that were almost 50 years old. And they looked great. If I had a box that was 50 years old, a Langstroth hive body, the thing would be disintegrating in 50 years, unless it was wax tips. There are ways that you can preserve hive bodies better that are Langstroth hive bodies, and one of them is wax tipping, which is something you can explore later on. Smoker is something you're going to need. That's going to cost you $25 to $50. You're going to need a veil for yourself and whoever else is working with you. You're looking at $100 to $150 for something like that. You're going to need hive tools. I usually recommend getting 2 or 3 of them when you start, because invariably you're going to be working bees in grassy areas and natural areas, and oftentimes the hive tool will fall out of your pocket and you won't be able to find it in the grass. You need to have a couple extra around just to have. Those are usually around $10. $25 is the really high end of hive tools. I normally work with the $10 versions, but that's totally up to you. And then the last piece of this, that's what you need to just keep the bees. And then if you want to harvest honey, you're going to need extraction equipment. And that is There's no price on that because that varies highly. If you're, keeping a couple hives, you can find a radial extractor or a tangential extractor maybe for a few $100s. If you're running, 10 hives or more, you're going to need a radial extractor that's probably going to cost you over $1,000. And then you've also got things like uncapping knives, scratchers, things like that, buckets for storing stuff in, all of those other things that go along with extraction, which you'll see in the extraction videos or in the honey processing videos that we have later on in the course. All very expensive stuff. And so you may end up spending, if you say you get into bees and you end up with 10 or 15 colonies or 20 colonies, you may end up spending several $1,000s in extraction equipment. And then you've also, you need to have a place to extract as well. Extracting in a dirty barn or something like that, it's a food product. You need to be extracting in like your kitchen or something like that. So, you may also need to, have like a small outbuilding or something like that you put together where you're going to be processing your honey. So those are all expenses that you need to keep in mind. Most of the time when people get started, they're just focused on everything except extraction equipment because it's what you need to get started. But invariably, you're going to get to a point in the season where you're maybe not your first season, but maybe the second season where you're going to be harvesting honey and you need to have the equipment to do that. Now, if you're part of a beekeeping club, there are some beekeeping clubs, and I wouldn't say it's the norm, but there are quite a few out there that have loaner equipment. So that's something, maybe if you have a bee club that has like a loaner extractor, you can use that or something like that. And there are cheaper ways to do this. I mean, you can crush your wax and extract honey that way. That is what we call a destructive harvest because you're basically destroying all of the wax infrastructure that those bees have put in place, which is very resource intensive to create. So if you're doing that, just keep in mind that you're going to be setting your bees back every single year because you're basically destroying everything they created. In the beekeeping industry, drawn frames, meaning frames that have been drawn with wax, are like gold. So you really want to keep those frames intact, which is why we use a non-destructive harvesting process, which uses things like radial extractors, hot knives, things like that. How many hives should I start with? Oh, I love this question. And the reason I love it is because, over 20 years of working in bees and running the Heroes to Hives program for over a decade, I have gotten so many very interesting conversations around how many bees I'm going to start with. Now, this is something I tell everybody. Start with 2 or 3 hives. That's ideal. 2 to 3, not one. Not one, because invariably what's going to happen is something's going to happen with that colony over the course of the season, and you can use another colony to support a colony that's struggling. So for example, if you have a colony that's like just not really putting on a lot of brood, the queen's having a real tough time getting things going because the population of the colony is just not really large, you can use another colony to take brood from, or you can take nurse bees from and add them to a colony that's small and to basically help the colony build up quicker. So you can use hives to support one another. If you lose a queen in one hive, you can raise a queen from another, or you can take a frame of eggs from that other hive and put it into the queenless hive and let them raise a queen. So always having at least 2 hives is really important for a consideration. 3, no more than 3 though. And like I said, that's why we do this, is to support one another. You need to keep in mind that you start with 2 or 3. If your bees survive through the winter, which is what we're trying to train you to do, you're going to double or triple that number every single year through reproductive splits that happen in the spring. If you don't do anything with your bees in the spring, they will just swarm on you. And that's the reproductive swarm. And we'll talk about this in the swarm lecture. But there's reproductive swarms and there's congestion swarms. Reproductive swarms are what happen in the spring. And those are things that we can participate in by taking those large colonies that have made it through the winter and splitting them into 2 colonies so that they just don't get overwhelmed with so many bees mid-season. That's where the congestion swarm comes in. Congestion swarm is there's too many bees in the space and there's nowhere for the queen to lay because the bees that are bringing in nectar and pollen, they're filling it everywhere they can find a space, and it basically squeezes out the queen, and you get to a point where the queen doesn't have enough laying space, brood pheromone is collapsed, queen pheromone starts to collapse, and the colony then swarms. So we want to make sure that we're taking part in that, and you having colonies that survive every year, you get those 3 colonies to survive through the year. Next year, you're going to have 6. The year after that, you're going to have 12. The year after that, you're going to have 24. The year after that, you're going to have 48. It's a slippery slope with honeybees when they start surviving. So make sure that you're looking towards the future. You're not saying, "Oh, well, I wanted to do 10, and Dr. Adams telling me I only can do 3. You'll be almost at 10 next year. You may be at 10 next year if these survive. Start with these 2 or 3, get your experience, get them to survive the winter, and you will be able to constantly re-up or increase your number of colonies every single year with this type of success. So focus on getting it right first. And if you get it right with those 2 or 3 colonies and they live through the season and you get into spring and you're able to split them, you're going to have more colonies than you want to deal with in a few years. And that's where you get into like selling bees. So selling nukes or those types of things. That's where you get into that other profit stream, is when your bees are surviving and you're making splits. And like I said, you're going to double or triple those numbers every single year with survival. What hive style should I use? Okay, so I kind of alluded to this with the picture with the Aja hives, but the hive style you want to use needs to reflect your physical needs. If you are a double amputee and maybe in a wheelchair, a Langstroth hive may not be for you because it requires a lot of heavy lifting and moving, lifting and twisting and setting things down. Maybe that's not the right hive for you. Maybe an Aja hive is much better because you never have to lift a box. You're just lifting a frame. And when I was in Slovenia a couple years ago, I worked with the Slovenian Paraplegic Beekeepers Association and a whole beekeeping association with people who are in wheelchairs that are keeping bees very successfully. Now, so it all depends. So you have the Aja hive in the top left. On the right, you've got a standard Langstroth hive. Now you can see that Langstroth hive that you're looking at there has all medium boxes. So you may not be familiar with this, or you may. You'll learn about it in the equipment lecture. But there are mainly two standard sizes of hive bodies. There are actually 3, but most of us only use the 2. So there's medium hive bodies, there's deep hive bodies, and there's shallow hive bodies. So 9 and 5/8, 6 and 5/8, 5 and 11/16 is the height on those boxes. You have a decision here to make at the beginning of your beekeeping adventure of what box style I want to use. Now, the industry standard is 2 deeps for the brood chamber and then mediums for honey supers. But guess what? The bees don't care what size box they're in. It really comes down to what you want. Now, if you decide I want to run deeps, some people do all deeps. Those honey supers, when those deeps are full of honey, are going to weigh up to 90 pounds. Medium hive bodies, full of honey, about 50. Shallow hive bodies, which are the 5 and 11/16, those are going to basically top out at about 35 pounds when they're full of honey. So if you're thinking to yourself, I can't lift a 50-pound box, well, then you shouldn't be keeping medium hive bodies. You should be keeping shallows. Or if you think, I can't lift 90 pounds, then you should be keeping medium hive bodies instead of deep hive bodies. It all reflects your physical needs. But that is an option you have with Langstroth equipment. And because you're at the beginning of your endeavor, you can make those decisions. You can also decide if you want to run 8-frame equipment or 10-frame equipment. You know, if you run 8-frame equipment, you're reducing your hive weight by, about 20%. And so those are strategies that you can use to meet your physical needs. So the hive style is really up to you. Now, there are some exceptions. Not all climates can support all hive styles, and that's why I have the 2 pictured at the bottom. These are 2 very viable hive styles. One on the left is a long Langstroth hive. This is actually known as a Brummel hive, which was created by Courtney Brummel out of the University of Nebraska. But it's a long 30-frame hive that you manage from the top. Now, this particular one, you can adapt for winter climates. Now, the thing about winter, if you haven't lived in an area where you have heavy winter like I do, bees move up over the course of winter. They don't move side to side. And so you need to make sure, if you're in a winter climate, that you have a hive style where the resources, the honey, are above the cluster during winter, because that's how they're going to move as a cluster during the winter. They're not going to move left to right. They're going to move up, and they're going to move up. And so if you have a hive style that can't accommodate honey on top, like a long hive, that's a problem for northern climates. If you live in somewhere where the climates are temperate, you can pretty much do any kind of hive style you want. The nice thing about this Brummel hive that you see at the left is this is a modular hive, and so you can actually create a situation where you can take those honey frames that are at the far ends of the hive and actually stack them on top in a regular Langstroth box so that you can accommodate this for winter. You basically run it as a long hive during the summer so that you don't have to lift anything heavy, and then you put it together with hives on top during the winter so that there's honey above. The one at the bottom right is a Kenyan top bar hive. This is a top bar hive, so does not use standard Langstroth frames like the one to the left, the Brummel hive, but it uses a top bar, which is basically just a bar that bees build wax off of. Now, this you cannot put honey up on top. So these are nearly impossible. If you live in a cold climate, these are nearly impossible to overwinter because you just don't have enough space in that bottom box to get enough honey to where they're going to survive all year on that. You need to have more resources. Like, on a top bar hive, your cluster is going to be probably about, I'd say at the max, about 10 frames across. Those 10 frames in a top bar hive are only going to, at the very most, equate to about 50 pounds of honey. That's not a lot of honey to get through a harsh winter. And so the likelihood those are going to survive in northern climates is very remote. They're very nice to work. They're really beautiful hives. I have a couple of these, but what we do with our top bar hives is that basically I have adapted some Langstroth deep hive bodies to accept my top bars, so that I actually can move everything into a Langstroth style hive going into the winter, and then I steal honey from other colonies to put honey supers on top of those top bars in a Langstroth box. So you can adapt things. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, I'll be real honest, but those are things to keep in mind. But like I said, if you live in a temperate climate, Kenyan top bar hives are really fun hives to keep. They are hives that you do destructive harvests on because they do not use foundation like Langstroth hives or Aja hives. So you actually end up cutting all the comb off where you're harvesting honey from. And that's also a way to get cut comb honey as well. You also need to be considering the apiary location. So apiary location is a really important thing. You want to make sure that you're putting your bees in a place that supports them, both from a foraging standpoint, but also something that it's accessible for you. You don't want to put your bees way out in a field where you got to walk a quarter of a mile to get to, because you're going to be bringing equipment back and forth all the time. You need to have an apiary that's located close to where you can bring a vehicle or a side-by-side or a tractor or whatever you're going to use to move your equipment around. But apiary location is really important when it comes to accessibility. Harvesting plans, you also want to have harvesting plans as well in place because you're going to be dealing with a lot of weight when you're moving heavy honey supers around. So harvesting plans come into play as well in how you're going to be processing that. If you are not going to have access to an extractor and you live in a temperate climate, maybe a top bar hive is right for you. Maybe that's the style of hive that works for you because it eliminates the need to have a lot of this expensive extracting equipment. But again, it's not a viable option for a lot of the areas of the United States. You also want to understand what the purpose of the hive is. Is the hive, am I going to be, and the reason I say that is, like, am I going to be doing pollination contracts? If you're planning on doing pollination contracts, you need to be thinking that, well, there's really one style of hive that you're going to be keeping, unless you put Aja hives in a trailer, which I have seen in Slovenia. That's how they do migratory beekeeping there, is they have trailers that are enclosed and have all the hives inside of the trailer facing out. You can do something fancy like that. For sure, and still be able to do that. But for the most part in the United States, if you're using hives for pollination, what you're going to be doing is, if you look at this picture here in the top right, you see behind this, this is an 8-frame all medium hive that's in the foreground. In the background, you see these 3 sections of 4 hives each. Those are what we call 4-way pallets. That is a standard way that beekeepers in commercial industry move bees around, because you can pick them up with a forklift, you can load them on a truck, you can stack them real tight to each other because they're all on pallets, and they're very easy to move around. And that's how pollination contracts are typically done, is with 4-way or 6-way pallets. And so if pollination is the goal you want, is to get bees to California, or you want to be running pollination contracts throughout your state, you're likely going to palletize this equipment. And so that's something you need to know ahead of time, is if that's a goal, maybe I want to start with pallets instead of spending a bunch of money on bottom boards and things like that. So it just depends on what the purpose of the hive is going to serve for you. But for the most part, standard Langstroth hives are fine, and things like Aja hives are also really good as well. The other thing I should have mentioned too, if you're looking at Langstroth hives, that there are some alternatives now to woodenware, the polystyrene hives, which are also a little bit lighter than the woodenware. Not terribly lighter. I mean, the frames are going to weigh the same, and the honey and all that stuff is going to weigh the same. It's just the hive body itself weighs a little less. So, there's that option too. What bees should I start with? And what I mean by that is, what should I start with is, like, should I buy a nuclear package? And what kind of queens should I have? Those types of things. So what should I start with? So you have 2 options when it comes to buying bees. You're going to have an option to buy a package, or you're going to have an option to buy a nuke, which is known as a hive nucleus. The difference between the two is pretty dramatic. So you see the two pictures at the bottom here. The one to the left is a package of bees. The package of bees is basically a box full of bees that were dumped out into that box anywhere from a day to maybe a week before you receive this package. Packages are the main way that bees are produced in the United States, and packages are typically produced in the South or in the West, where climates are very warm so that they can start raising bees very early in the year so that they can make packages to sell to other beekeepers. Typically, packages start coming available in, I'd say, early spring and are usually available up into the northern regions of the United States until about, you can buy packages in July, but typically around early June's the last time you're going to see shipments of this moving. I mean, some of the bigger supply companies like Man Lake and stuff like that, you can buy packages from them into July a lot of the times. But most of the time, if you're working at a local level where you're getting packages, typically the way that works is that you have an individual, say myself, that I live in Michigan. I will drive down to the package supplier in, say, Georgia, pick up a truckload of packages, and then come back to Michigan and then distribute those packages as to sell to individuals at clubs or wherever I'm distributing those from. And typically that's the normal way that a lot of people buy bees. Now, nukes, in my opinion, are a much better option. You have a purchasing bees lecture in here as well, where we go into depth of why one is better than the other for different reasons. But I really we produce nukes. We produce a lot of nukes. And we also, if I were to buy bees, I'm always going to want to buy a nuke. And the reason is because it's a fully functioning colony. It's the picture you see at the bottom right. When you buy a nuke, it's basically a fully functioning 5-frame colony. It has a laying queen, it's got brood, it's got honey, it's got space, it's got all those things. The package on the left is a box of bees that you're literally going to dump out into a hive, and they're going to have to start from scratch. So if you buy a nuke, you basically get about 3 to 4 weeks of a head start when it comes to development. If you are new to beekeeping and you have brand new equipment, the big hiccup here is drawn wax. A package put into new equipment has to draw wax before it can do anything, before the queen can lay, before they can store pollen, before they can store nectar, before they can do anything, they have to draw wax. And they produce the wax from wax glands on their abdomen. So in order to produce wax, there has to be a lot of food coming in to feed that resource allocation from taking food in and developing wax from that intake. So it is very resource intensive to draw wax. This is one of the main things that people struggle with in the beginning of their beekeeping endeavors is I have a package and I have brand new equipment that is not drawn. So if you are one of those people, I would highly encourage you to try and find a nuke. Nukes on conversely to packages, you can buy packages through the mail. I mean, they will send packages USPS. But you will not be able to buy nukes via the mail. You have to pick up nukes from the supplier directly. So nukes are typically locally produced and sold locally, whereas packages are produced and then distributed across the United States. So it's just a little bit different. There are also a much more limited supply of nukes available to you as a beekeeper. The genetic line of your bees. In the beginning, I would not worry about this too much. Worry about getting high quality bees from a reputable supplier. The genetic line, although it does come into play, it's going to be something that you can always correct. So, and the reason I say that is the line right below this. The genetic line, although it is important, and we'll talk about that in later lectures, especially when we talk about Varroa, the genetic line can be a very important part of your success. But if you get hung up on, I want purebred Russian honeybees this year, you may find it very difficult to get there because I think there are 11 breeders of purebred Russian honeybees in the United States. So the supply is very limited if that's what you wanted. You can always replace a queen though to get that genetic line that you want. So what I would say is focus on getting a high quality nuke or, really high quality package from a reputable dealer. And then if you decide, hey, I want to get a Varroa sensitive hygienic queen, or I want to get a Purdue ankle biter, or I want to get one of Corey Stevens' Missouri mite hunters or something like that, then buy that queen and requeen your colony so that you have those genetics in it. But to get things started, I wouldn't get too hung up on that. Typically the lines that you see in packages are Italians and Carnolians. And so, you have two choices. Carnolians do a little bit better in northern climates than Italians, but Italians, people say, are a little more gentle, but my Slovenian friends would argue that until they're blue in the face. They're both pretty gentle. Bees are very gentle. They're very docile organisms if you're treating them with respect and handling them correctly. So don't really get hung up on genetic lines in the beginning. That's something that you're going to move into as you learn beekeeping more and get more experience with it. But like I said, you can always replace a queen and get the genetic line that you want. Do your due diligence on your supplier. Make sure you're buying from a reputable company. I cannot tell you how many customers that I have had nightmare stories about the nukes that they purchased from somebody else, where they basically got a box of, 2, 3 frames of bees and, dinky colony is what I would call that. You see the nuke at the bottom there? That's one of our nukes. When you buy a nuke, it should be 5 frames covered in bees, full of resources, and full of brood. Anything other than that shouldn't be being sold as a nuke, in my opinion. That's not a high quality nuke. So make sure you're getting it from a reputable supplier. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that, as you move, just like we talked about previously, that, you get 2 colonies to survive, they turn into 4 next year, invariably you're going to get a beekeeper who's like 3 to 5 years into their experience, which in my opinion is still a beginner, who may be selling nukes and kind of have an idea of what they're doing, but maybe selling something that's not really up to par. That's what you need to be conscious of. Just make sure that you know what you're getting when you're purchasing bees. And local bees, in my opinion, are always the best. Nukes primarily, but they are in limited supply. Now, if you live in like Georgia or somewhere or in California, you have local packages available all day long, and you live in a very warm climate. If you live in a warm climate, packages are fine. If you live in a cold climate, nukes should be the priority. And the reason I say that is because nukes already have drawn wax. Like I mentioned before, packages with no drawn wax is really tough. When you live in an area like northern Michigan, where we have 6 months of season, and you have a package on brand new equipment, it's going to take them a couple months just to draw wax out so that they could actually get a hive of size going. You're basically going to be spending your entire first year drawing wax, if that's the case. If you were to buy a package. If you live in the South and you have 11 months of honey flight or bee flight every year, you can get away with a package because it's a much slower process. They have plenty of time to raise or to draw wax. You're in a limited season, nukes should be the priority. How do I find other beekeepers? Another great question. Well, your state beekeeping organization is a really good place to start. Every state has a state beekeeping organization. Every state has a state beekeeping conference. Go to those conferences. Learn from those experts. All beekeeping is local. Although you are taking a program that is a national program, we are a Midwest-based program. So primarily what I'm going to be teaching you is what we do here in the Midwest. I will, put caveats in there for, the West Coast and the South and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, we are a Midwest-based program, and we are teaching beekeeping that we do in the Midwest. That's why you need to be part of an organization like a state beekeeping organization, because that's where you're going to learn all the local stuff. Now, biology and stuff like that doesn't change over time or doesn't change between location. What does change, though, is the amount of resources that are coming in when you're treating for mites or when you're monitoring for mites, when your dearths are occurring. All of those things are local. And I can't teach you that because I don't live everywhere. But what I would say is the experts at your state beekeeping organization, those are the ones you should be leaning upon. The other people you should be leaning upon are the land grant universities, the Michigan State universities, the Ohio State universities, the University of California, Texas A&M, all of these land grant institutions, University of Florida, Auburn. Those are the organizations, those are the institutions where your researchers and extension personnel who are experts in beekeeping reside. That should be the place that you're going. Get involved with them. Go to their workshops. Go to their, some like here at Michigan State University, Anna Heck and Megan Milbrath host office hours where you can go in and ask your questions and things like that. Those are really important things to understand because those land grant institutions are there specifically to support agricultural producers. And so they are the experts in your state. They're going to be able to answer a lot of those local questions for you. Local bee clubs, you should all be part of a local bee club because, again, everything's local. This is also where you're going to find bees. So where you're going to buy nukes from primarily or from your local bee club. You might be able to get packages through them, queens, things like that. And you're going to have people in those local bee clubs who've been doing this for decades and have lots of experience, wealths of information that they want to share. And that's where you're going to get that. Social media and YouTube. These can be very great resources or super horrible resources. There is a gray area in between, I'm sure, but at least from my experience, it's one or the other. So social media, we all know how much misinformation is out on the internet. Social media is no different. Anybody can create a video and post it to social media or YouTube and sound like an expert. Put some fancy editing to it, and all of a sudden, you're a beekeeping expert that has 2 years of experience. Happens a lot in the beekeeping industry. So if you are taking advice from people on social media and YouTube, there are two things that I want you to keep in mind. Number one, this individual should be a successful beekeeper, meaning that they have been keeping bees for a long time and their winter survival rates are very high, especially if they're in northern climates, like 15% or less is their loss rate. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is, are they local to you? So there are a lot of great videos out there. Here on our YouTube channel, there's a lot of great videos out there, but not all those videos pertain to you. If you live in northern Michigan and you are taking all of your beekeeping advice from somebody who has a YouTube channel in Alabama or Texas, the management of that organism in that location is completely different than what you're doing. And so your reliance upon an expert that is not local to you but is all over the internet, although you may take tips and tricks and things like that that may not be related to seasonality from them, if you're talking about seasonal management, you need to be taking this from somebody who is local to you and who is an expert. So that's your criteria for determining who is going to be doing this. Like I said, anybody can create a fancy video on YouTube and sound like they know what they're doing. But the credentials of those individuals are really important, and their success is really important as well. So just make sure you're doing your due diligence if you're using the social media and YouTube avenue for a lot of your education. And there are a lot of great YouTube channels out. I don't want to discount the expertise of a lot of these YouTube influencers, I guess you would call them, in the beekeeping industry. There are a lot of really great beekeepers out there, and there are a lot of really great beekeeping channels out there. University of Guelph has an awesome beekeeping channel. Bob Benny does a lot of really great videos. Corey Stevens does a lot of really great stuff. Randy Oliver, if you're looking at like scientificbeekeeping.com, Randy does amazing work. So there's a lot of really amazing people out there in the interwebs that are doing really great work that you can view through social media and YouTube and things like that. Just make sure you're doing your due diligence to make sure this person knows what they're doing. If it's a hobby farmer, that's been keeping bees for a couple years, they might have some great advice on stuff, but I would always double check what they're telling you, especially when it comes to management. Because that's really where the crux of all of this comes, as we manage honeybees, and you need to know what you're doing. How important is education? Ooh, it is the most important thing you're going to do to be successful at beekeeping. You need to understand the organism, and you need to understand its pests and pathogens well before you start beekeeping. In my opinion, there is no beginner level on pest and pathogen management. That is the thing you should be taking absolutely the most seriously of everything, is understanding your pests, being able to identify them by sight and different life stages, because oftentimes things look different. Like, for example, Athena tumida, which is the small hive beetle, has a larval stage, it has a pupal stage, it has an adult stage. They all look different. So making sure that you can identify things by sight. And we're not talking a whole lot of organisms. When you get to the pests and pathogens lecture, you'll see we're not talking about like 100 different pests you have to know. There's not a lot of them, but you need to know them. And so take the time to educate yourself. Take the time to do your due diligence and really get to know this stuff. And that will pay off in spades in the future. Formal education will definitely pay off. The fact that you're here watching this video right now, kudos to you, because you've realized that I need to get some education before I jump into this. Take that really seriously. Take that beginner's mind that you have right now and carry that with you your entire beekeeping career, and you will be very successful. If you're constantly coming at this with a beginner's mind and coming at this with a thirst for education, you will be successful. All right, so that's what we got today for the Curious About Beekeeping lecture. You can subscribe now to our Heroes to Hives YouTube channel to stay up to date on these videos and continue this course. We will be posting videos, we post videos pretty regularly as we've migrated to YouTube for the entire course now. So there'll be a lot of content that's continuing to be uploaded to this channel from here on out. And so this is where you can subscribe now so you make sure that you get those notifications when we post new videos. And that's a great place to start. And so take the education seriously. Take your time when you go through these. I would encourage you not to just like let it play in the background, videos and just expect you're going to absorb it. Really spend your time studying this material, and you will absolutely reap the benefits of it. So I thank you for today, and hope you enjoy the next lecture.